Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session recorded on Friday, the 8th of March, for a broadcast on Thursday, the 14th of March. Today, we'll be talking about major donors, and as part of today's discussion, we'll be looking at how to identify and cultivate major donors and the crucial role they can play for an organization. My name is Jacoba Bruneel, and I'm a development manager here at Achates, and we're a creative consultancy with a holistic approach to recruitment, fundraising, and strategy. We take our name from Greek and Roman mythology. Achates was a close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas, so we think our name quite neatly describes the relationship that we offer to our clients within the cultural sector. We set up Achates Live to support the sector and to bring fundraisers and other arts professionals together to discuss key topics, and also to enable you to help and support each other. Whilst we acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all the answers, what we do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we are passionate about using this perspective and role in a supportive way. And finally, just to say that all of the information shared in today's conversation is of course live and correct at the time of recording. I am delighted to be able to welcome our special guests who will be exploring this topic with us today. Zosha Nash is head of philanthropy at the Old Vic in London. She started her career at the children's health and education charity Young Epilepsy as a fundraising assistant and ended there as a capital campaigns manager, completing a 10 million campaign to build a new special educational needs school. She was head of development at the Foundling Museum in Bloomsbury for 4 years, where she oversaw fundraising from individuals, trusts and foundations, and corporate supporters, and ran the most successful Art Happens campaign to date. She joined the Old Vic in 2019 to work on their 19 million capital campaign and raise funds towards their award-winning work both on and off stage. Hi, Zosha.
Good morning, Jacoba. Thank you for that lovely welcome. Great to be here.
And next we have Rebecca Williams, Bex's Head of Development, Bradford 2025 UK City of Culture. With 20 years experience supporting the arts and heritage sector, she has worked across a number of national, regional and independent cultural organisations. She started her career as a field archaeologist, but quickly realised that museums and galleries had the heating on, and she fell into fundraising while delivering learning sessions at Rydale Folk Museum in full medieval costume, of course, before development roles at the Royal Armouries and York Museums Trust, covering a variety of major multi-million capital, revenue and acquisitions projects. Most recently, she steered the Yorkshire Sculpture Park's fundraising through the COVID-19 pandemic, ensuring retention of the full staff team, of which she is incredibly proud. At Bradford 2025, Bex is responsible for fundraising from statutory and private sources to deliver the largest and most ambitious City of Culture yet. Hi, Bex.
Hi, Jacoba. Thanks for having me today.
So if you are watching this, you will already know that fundraising is all about relationships. Whether you're cultivating gifts from individuals, corporates, or trusts and foundations, it is vital to have established a warm relationship on the common ground of the change you and your prospect believe in bringing about. Few relationships, however, can be as transformational for an organisation as those with a major donor. Not only can a major gift contribute significantly towards revenue income targets, but the visibility of long-term major support can also be a catalyst for other gifts. We know from recent reports that the cultural sector is facing a challenging fundraising climate, with the most recent Charities Aid Foundation report showing that the arts receive less than 1% of overall charitable giving in the UK. And securing gifts from trusts and foundation has become increasingly competitive, as there has been extremely limited growth in the number of foundations supporting cultural projects. And we have also seen some key art funders beginning to close their doors, with the Foyle Foundation, for instance, recently announcing that it is intending to spend down by 2025. Other foundations, such as the Claude Duffield Foundation, the Limbury Trust and the Cadogan Charity, have been overextended and have for several years operated a multiple-year time lag on commitments. And at the same time, many other trusts and foundations have either very strict criteria and/or elaborate application and reporting procedures, which limits the freedom of the support offered and poses a heavy burden on staff resources. Yet, whilst giving to arts and culture from trusts and foundations has decreased by 5% and corporate has decreased by 7%. The 22 private investment in culture survey commissioned by the Arts Council reported that overall individual giving has increased by 6%, and that individual philanthropy remains the most significant area of voluntary income to the cultural sector, accounting for 44% of total private giving to culture in 2021 and growing, and that donations remain the most significant form of individual giving in arts and culture, accounting for 61% of the total. We know that this giving is not evenly distributed nationally, with 91% of individual giving going to the top 50 recipients of private investments, and that's often major cultural brands like Tate and the British Museum and the Royal Opera House, who have large and experienced fundraising teams and can offer great benefits to their donors, as well as the high-profile brand association with major individual donors, which major individual donors often wish to secure. And these often London-based brands also have access to a very diverse pool of philanthropists, with the Coutts 2017 £1 million donors report highlighting that London is the hub of UK philanthropy, with most large donations of over £1 million originating in London. So with this landscape in mind, we know that major donor schemes will look very different when speaking to a London organisation or a regional organisation. But regardless of where you're working, cultivating the relationship and bringing a gift over the line is, of course, about creating the space and inviting the donor in to make a big difference. Finally, just also to note that the current cost of living crisis is, of course, impacting everyone. And while we're thinking here about major donors and therefore generally high net worth individuals, and the cost of living crisis will be having a more acute impact on some other groups, inflation and rising costs will be impacting major donors as well. And this will translate to how they make decisions about where they give money and why to create the most impact. So I'd love to start you both by asking to give us some insight into your own work and experiences in building long-term relationship with major donors. Zosha, can we come to you first?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jacoba. So yeah, just to give a bit of background about myself, as Jacoba mentioned, I've been in fundraising for over a decade, and that's across all streams, but there has been a focus in various capacities on major donors. I started my career at the charity Young Epilepsy, which did have a national reach, but my focus was on their campus, which is down in Surrey, where I spent 5 years with a team raising £10 million to build this new school for children with acute epilepsy, autism, and learning difficulties. So this was raised through major donations from individuals, trusts and foundations, and various higher level events. But as we all know, ultimately, most of these gifts were at the discretion of individuals who were making personal decisions about where to give their money, even if it was through a trust and foundation. So as part of this team, I assisted in bringing in our lead donation of £1 million, which was from an individual through his charitable trust. And we also worked with our development board to approach their contacts. We ran major fundraising events, and they helped us to make connections to previously untapped networks at that charity. I then moved on to the Foundling Museum, where major donor fundraising looked very different. There were certainly no £1 million donations coming through our door with any regularity, and it was more focused on strategy around multi-year donations from individuals, which included the launch of a sort of high-level multi-year membership scheme, which contributed towards our exhibitions and also our education programs that we were running. I worked closely with our director on this and our senior volunteers, and that was bringing in around 80k after 2 years, which was a significant portion of our income, our annual income. And it also had the benefit of being generally ring-fenced towards exhibitions or education rather than being specifically restricted to projects within that. So it did mean that we were able to sort of claim back a bit of that ever-elusive core cost fundraising along the way, which is something that I do always try and weave in when we're making any major asks. I then started at the Old Vic in September 2019. So as you can imagine, it's been quite a dramatic few years, quite a strange time to start at a new place. And to give some context on the organisation, I'm sure the name the Old Vic is familiar to people, but under our artistic director, Matthew Warchus, the Old Vic has developed a strong identity as we're an independent creative powerhouse for entertainment and education. So this kind of dual identity of social mission and onstage work. And there's been a big push particularly in recent years, to make sure we're reaching the widest possible audience with our work, both on and off stage. So the team generally across the organisation, and specifically the development team, are balancing a £19 million capital campaign. We have 5 on-stage productions each year. We have 12 vital education and community outreach projects, and that's before we even get into core costs, and we receive no regular government subsidy towards that. So we're entirely reliant on ticket sales from our shows and the generosity of our supporters in terms of fundraising. Our revenue target comes in between 3.5 and 4 million annually, getting closer and closer to 4 million with each passing year. So there's plenty of fundraising that needs to be done, and obviously major gifts is a big part of that, especially on the capital side as we look towards closing the gap on our target. And major donor giving is a bastion of capital fundraising across the board. When those targets are coming in the millions, it's imperative that much of that is raised through those 5 and 6 figure gifts and 7-figure gifts even, to ensure that those projects have the best success in the relevant time frame. So we do this through working with our senior volunteers, drawing on their networks, talking to our development boards and also our current supporters, not only to ask them to give to the projects, but also to actively introduce new people to the organisation. But once those people are through the door, it's obviously our job as fundraisers to ensure that they're cultivated and stewarded appropriately to the highest possible level through their giving journey. So much of my role as head of philanthropy centres on creating that pipeline, making those connections, putting those lists in front of senior volunteers, facilitating those meetings, and then personally getting to know those philanthropists as people in order to put together an ask that will appeal to them and make sure that they can connect with our organisation in the best possible way. It's equally true, obviously, with the capital appeal as with the education and community projects, which, in my experience, an increasing number of major donors are looking towards that more kind of grassroots education and community work. And it also applies to our onstage productions, where we have to keep a balance between our big star-studded shows that get people through the doors and get those tickets sold. But we also need to ensure that we have new voices who are telling fresh stories to reach our current audiences and introducing new people to the theatre who may never have been before. So as you've touched on, Jacoba, and there are some great stats in there actually to prove it, fundraising is difficult, and major donor fundraising is a challenge as well. I'm sure we'll cover that in more detail today between you, Rebecca, and I. But there's increased pressure on funding because of the government cuts to the arts, reduced personal capacity even at that really high level, and a real demand for these tangible and meaningful results that we can show in our reporting. But major donor fundraising is all about making connections and showing the impact that our projects will have and are currently having, so that we can ensure they connect with the work and see the necessity for funding it. So I look forward to speaking more about it in the next hour. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear also about the differences between the different organisations you've worked at. Bex, if we could come to you next. Thank you.
Thank you. So I, at Bradford 2025 UK City of Culture, I'm currently responsible for all income streams across the board. But my journey obviously started well before that, 20 odd years ago. I very much fell into fundraising. I don't think anyone actually sets out to be a fundraiser. It often naturally happens, especially among those of us who are able and happy to communicate about what the need of your particular charity or organisation is. So my experience runs from a start mostly in trusts fundraising at Rydale Folk Museum, and that was mostly for educational and community engagement programmes, really core to the grassroots of that community. But then that moved on quickly to major exhibitions and capital campaigns at a national scale when I worked at Royal Armouries. That moved on again to statutory and membership fundraising at York Museums Trust and the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. I had a similar experience to Zosha when I joined Yorkshire Sculpture Park in February 2020 on a maternity cover initially, expecting just a year of looking after fundraising, and actually turned down into probably one of the biggest challenges of my career to date. Across all that, I think for me, the most rewarding sector has indeed been major donor fundraising. The approach is really important. For me, I essentially see it as matchmaking. You are matchmaking people with ability to the change they want to see in the world. And that can be really rewarding for both of you. I enjoy taking the time to speak with, getting to know donors, understanding what motivates them, how they tick, how they like to be engaged, but also what keeps them up at night. So my goal is when a major donor sees my caller ID, they don't think, oh no, it's Bex. What do they want from me now? But more is, ooh, it's Bex. What new thing is happening? What can we be involved with? I've found success in established organizations with long-term plans and strategies, because you have that time to get to know donors and for them to get to know you, your organization, and your beneficiaries. At Bradford 2025, time is a luxury we don't really have. So our challenge is to raise around about £50 million in a relatively short space of time. You're balancing that expectation of national spectacle with local need and the benefits of engaging with the arts for those people and communities in desperate need. So that we have to engage people meaningfully. We've got to challenge those perceptions about giving to shorter term activity, but at the same time embedding relationships with existing cultural organisations and community groups to ensure a legacy well beyond 2025, because the impacts of this sort of investment will last for decades. Insights from my experience to date, essentially, as Zosha has already highlighted, people give to people. You need to be real, you need to be human, you need to be present, you need to get to know your donors inside out. And that when you do that, the ask, it should be the easiest bit and not to be scared of it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bex. Really interesting to hear, I think, about that difference between the long-term at established organizations and the short term. At Bradford, that does sound really challenging. So next we'll go on to some questions, and I think interesting, given the context you're both working in being very different, is I wanted to ask how you define a supporter as a major donor, and I wonder if Bex, you would be the first to answer that.
Certainly. So there's lots of different ways to define a supporter as a major donor. It's been different for me in different organisations. I've seen some stats thrown around, such as it's 5 times the average gift to your organisation. But ultimately, it's not really about your organisation. It's about anyone who gives a gift that is significant to them and what that means to them in terms of a major donation. So the average threshold in my experience for a gift has been for early gifts has been between £8,000 to £12,000 to start with. But when you're talking about high net worth individuals, a capacity of giving to the level of £1 million and more to ultra high net worth individuals. But it's very much a case of not expecting that level straight away. It's a long-term relationship that you're building with people. Many people with potential for major donor level giving will give a very small gift to start, see how that goes as they're building that trust and relationship with an organisation. And they may be giving that level to multiple organisations. So it's part of your role as a major donor fundraiser and a relationship builder to engage them in that process so they can feel comfortable, they get to know the organisation, they have that trust with you, and that you're able to answer robust questions about what it is you're doing, how you're doing it. So being prepared for that is absolutely vital. So I think, to sum that up again, a major donor, it's what's significant to them as individuals, not necessarily to you as an organisation, and you should treat them all in that vein.
Yes, thank you. Zosha, what are your thoughts on the definition of a major donor?
Absolutely, as Bex says, it's entirely relative across the board, to the organisation, to your team, to the person who you're speaking to. If you're running a very major capital appeal, your major donor list might be running to sort of 10, 20, 50 million pound donations. But if you're a grassroots organisation with a turnover of 50k, then somebody giving £1,000 will be a huge leap in your target. So it entirely depends on what you see as a major donor and what they see as a major donor. As Bex says, there's all these sort of nominal statistics you can put on it. Is it a 5-figure gift? Is it a certain percentage of your annual target? But you equally need to look at how somebody's giving across your organisation. Somebody could give 25k to one project, but they might also give £5,000 to 5 different projects or 5 different areas where you're fundraising, which would equally make them a major donor towards your organisation, even if a single gift didn't get them to that expected level. So yes, absolutely. I think it's how you treat your major donors can run to a very broad spectrum of people on your donor list.
Definitely, thank you. So you've talked a lot about the relationship you need to build, and you've hinted at how you kind of start prospecting major donors. But I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how to find major donors and the steps you would take and how you would initiate that very initial conversation. Zosha, could I come to you, please?
Absolutely. Well, in any major giving situation, always the best way is, as well as engaging them with the organisation, obviously, is a peer-to-peer ask. And unfortunately, my personal address book, doesn't contain very many people, or maybe any people, who could give £100,000 to the Old Vic or anywhere else for that matter. So for major donor giving, we are reliant much of the time on those peer-to-peer asks from senior volunteers, whether that's trustees on our main board or members of our sub boards, development boards, project boards, etc. But we're also not expecting them to come up with those names themselves. So the initial legwork will absolutely be from myself and my team. And that could be doing very sort of simple and seemingly obvious things like checking the Sunday Times giving list and looking at the donor pages of other similar organisations or organisations who have done similar campaigns, big capital campaigns or similar education projects and so forth. It would also include things like going on LinkedIn and doing some network mapping of people who are connected with our organisation, whether it's senior volunteers, whether it's current donors, or people who have shown an interest in the organisation. And then we can go to them with a list, usually a sort of short to medium list, so they don't lose interest, of names, to say, we think you might know these people through these connections. We've done the legwork for you. Can you make an introduction for us? And to be honest, 9 times out of 10, even if they don't know them personally, they'll know somebody who does. So I have found that to be the most effective way to get those sort of major donor names on the list. Equally, we're very lucky at the Old Vic that we have a space that we can bring people, and we have shows that we can take them to see. We have very loyal and incredible membership supporter base. And at the higher levels of that as well, we often find people bringing along their friends to events, and when they're treated well and they see the good work they were doing, what their money is going towards, they also are more amenable to becoming involved themselves. So those would be my initial tips for a first contact.
Could I ask, so how do you involve or do you involve other departments in that initial cultivation as well? Other departments at the Old Vic?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on what we're looking to get money towards, obviously. Our education and community projects are a really key part of what we do at the Old Vic. They're just as important as the work that we're doing on stage, even though most people hear Old Vic and think of what's happening in our main theatre house. So absolutely, we would bring members of our E&C team along to meetings if that was appropriate, or if someone's coming along to an event, we would make sure there was a representative from that team there to speak to them. Equally, I've always found it's great to have beneficiaries from our programmes as far as possible, who can actually speak to why the money is needed, because they're on the ground and receiving the benefits. So if we can get potential donors or prospects in front of those people, that makes a huge difference, because they can say much more sort of eloquently and than we can as to why the project needs supporting, because they've been part of it. So yeah, we would draw in people across the board as necessary, as was appropriate for what we were pitching for.
Thank you. Bex, how would you approach those first steps?
So most major donors will come from your existing or lapsed audiences, whether that's attending the venue, links to the area in their youth, part of your membership scheme, etc. Some, as Zosha has outlined, come from your networks, your trustees, their contacts, your senior volunteers, and some will have given already, perhaps a small gift via a previous campaign. So mine your data, make sure your data is good when it goes into your system, however you're keeping it. Make sure it's good when it goes in, and make sure you're reviewing it so that you understand who those people are and what that potential is. And when you've identified them, as Zosha said, when you've done the legwork, inviting those people via peers to events, things that are happening that could engage them, often using existing events that are happening to get them to know what you're doing and how you're doing it, also to keep that pressure in terms of your resource to a manageable level. And when you've got them there, it's all about building that rapport. This needs to be two-way. You need to listen, give your donor space to talk. The aim is to build that trusting relationship. So don't start with yourself. Ask questions. Open questions are great. So they can decide where the conversation goes, which gives you clues about where to go with your eventual ask. So you can ask things like, so are there other causes you support? Tell me about them. What's exciting for you at the moment? What's keeping you up at night? It tells you what's important, who they've supported in the past, but it also finds out, so you can help you find out some of those hidden things that they don't like, such as too much or too little contact. I've had both in my career in the past. What acknowledgement they need, that sort of thing. It's also important through these conversations to understand the outcome that they want. How that balances against the outcome that's possible in the work that you're doing. And as always, be prepared to answer challenges and questions. So whether that's about your organization's finances, your governance, your history, your policies, you need to be able to demonstrate the impact of your work in relation to their interests. And it's absolutely vital to always keep your donor at the heart of the story, so they feel really valued and part of the work that you're doing, for that to be a meaningful long-term relationship.
Great. So obviously that building relationship is very, very bespoke and personal to the people you're working with and you're cultivating. So I was just wondering how you balance that very bespoke stewardship with staff capacity and resources, bearing in mind of the time and pressure on cultural organizations at the moment. Bex.
Certainly. So I start off by understanding a bit more on those initial conversations, so that we know how much resource to put into a relationship and how it's best going to work for them, what they might need. So those interactions, you can build an understanding of their motivations, whether it's to give something back, to make a difference, to change negative perception. That's something we're experiencing quite a lot in Bradford at the moment. Lots of our potential donors are really, really keen to see the city seen as they see it, not how the media might represent it. Sometimes it's accessing money can't buy experiences. Sometimes it's social recognition. In our role at the moment, we don't have buildings you can put a name on, so that social recognition is not going to be a thing. So working with those donors to understand what it is actually you can do, and if you've got the resource to do it. In this process, you've begun to evaluate their ability to give, and that connection to your organization, your mission, and your cultivation plan should be absolutely based on those motivations. So the different resources that you have at your disposal, depending on what your organization is, whether you're inviting people to events or workshops or talks, behind the scenes visits, private tours and views, receptions, and then access to senior people or experts in your organization, which Zosha raised earlier, and introducing potential donors to your beneficiaries where appropriate, so they can see the impact of your work. Understanding the costs of that fulfillment is a process that can take some time. You know your organization better than anyone, so you know what it will cost you to do that. And understanding that a process of cultivation can take 6 to 18 months, depending on the opportunities you have for engagement and the resource you have, but also the time frame of the donor themselves and when is a good time for them to give. So keeping those conversations going and understanding what that need is and how long it might take is really important for your cultivation plan. Most importantly, as part of this planning process, to make the most out of the resource at your disposal, to identify what you want your prospect to think, feel, and do at each interaction with you and your organization, so you're not wasting any of those opportunities to be impactful. So it can feel like a lot to cultivate a major donor, but there are lots of benefits, and it's really worth the time investment. The return on investment of a good relationship is going to be over decades. Hopefully, it's not going to be just a single gift. So you don't think about it in terms of return on a single gift. There's reciprocal profile raising, the networks and connections between you that can be developed over time, the potential for future giving. Absolutely. So in terms of planned giving and legacies, well beyond your initial gifts, but also then that sharing of expertise. So the value you'll get back from your donors can be considerable. But also to remember that despite that and long-term relationships, a single gift could transform your organization. So it's really important to remember the why that you're doing this. And as we've already spoken about briefly already, fundraising is a team activity. The whole organization should be a fundraising organization. So using your wider teams to balance that need and resource. And like Zosha already said, most of the time, they don't want to talk to the fundraisers. They want to talk to the experts, the people on stage, the people who are doing the work. So I think it's also important to remember, or to be able to identify when someone you're engaging isn't going to give, so that you're not continuing to expend resource on that cultivation, or it's a case of the cultivation method you're using at that time is not working. So making sure you are reviewing that regularly, keep that conversation going with your donor to make sure that they are happy with how things are going. When you've got that relationship, you'll be able to do that meaningfully and be able to make sure that you are expending resource in the right places at the right time.
Zosha, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bex has covered it beautifully there. It's always a challenge trying to balance that, ensuring that your major donor is getting the very best bespoke stewardship when there are only so many hours in the day and only so many days in the week, unfortunately. But we need to make sure that everything's as personalized and bespoke as possible. That's why we're here. That's the main sort of crux of our job, is to get to know these people and make sure that we are spending their money in the best way for them and for the organization. So we need to make sure everything's tailored as far as possible. But yeah, as Bex has said, trying to kind of piggyback on the kind of existing infrastructure that you might have, events that you already have going on, to activate contact touch points is really useful, because it means that it's, you're adding to something that's already being worked on, looping in other departments, so the relevant representatives, senior volunteers, other members of staff who can help spread the workload and who they want to hear from anyway, again, as Beck says. I don't think that it can be underestimated as well that there are things that don't take actually that long, that major donors and all donors really appreciate. An email just to check in to see, how they are. If you know that there's something coming up in their personal life that they've discussed with you, just checking in to see how it went, inviting them to come for a coffee so that you can spend 45 minutes telling them about the general goings on at your organization and how that relates to their gift and what they're giving to. And I know that a lot of our donors really appreciate the opportunity to connect with other donors to our organization and network with them as well, because they might meet people who are really interesting to them, or might be helpful to them in their career or what they're doing, or what other philanthropy that they might be interested in. So there are certain aspects that don't take up too much of the time in your day, but can mean a lot to someone who's giving to your organization.
Absolutely. So we talked a bit about, or rather Bex mentioned, the kind of long-term kind of return on investment and having that kind of prospect of, for instance, future gifts. And I was wondering if you had any tips on bringing on board major donors as regular supporters or regular annual supporters, rather than as just one-off major gift givers. So do you have any tips?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious one for my organization specifically is that we have a membership scheme. So we already have a mechanism that can convert donations into an ongoing annual donations at various levels, including, what I would certainly class as major giving. But equally, something I found effective in the past is, if you're talking to somebody about a large donation, ask them to split it over a number of years. Donors understand the imperative to be able to plan as an organization and plan ahead, particularly when you're looking at things like ongoing projects for education, community outreach, and so forth. A lot of the time, these projects won't happen if the funding isn't in place to run them. So if you can explain to a donor that actually, whilst this gift would be incredible this year, it would be even more incredible if we could rely on it split over 3 years, so we know that this project will happen every year. That's an even better ask, because in a way it feels like their gift is going even further. So just trying to think laterally about how you can best use their support, how you can keep them engaged, how you can have those milestones and touch points along the way to make sure that they know exactly what's going on with their project, and that includes the challenges as well as the successes. I'm yet to encounter a donor who hasn't understood that things happen differently to how you planned, so they want to hear about what's going on with the project as and what you're doing to to remedy those challenges as you go along as well. So definitely don't be afraid to keep them informed about every aspect of what they're funding. So yeah, I definitely think there are ways that you can take one donation and spread it out, and equally through, as Bex has covered, through stewarding them well and making sure that they feel like they're at the center of the story. They'll hopefully become so involved with your organization that they will want to support you for many years anyway, and they can see what a tangible difference their donation's making.
Bex, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think similarly, the nature of the organisations that I've worked in previously who have established membership and patron schemes, that it's actually been the other way around and converting those who are regularly giving at a much lower level, converting those into being able to give significant gift towards campaigns and projects that meet their interests. So by this point, if they have given a gift to you or multiple gifts over multiple years, by this point you know them well, they know you, and you're being really clear about your organization's needs and how they're changing over time. So I like to highlight the importance, when appropriate, of unrestricted gifts, especially when it comes to that regular annual support. And we know charities face incredible challenges when it comes to our finances and changing situations year on year. But it's quite possible that your donors won't know that, they won't understand the value of that sort of giving and what it can do to an organization's in supporting its resilience to weather those sorts of changes and impacts. I think language is really important when you're talking to donors about this sort of thing. Your cause, the impact the donor is making, needs to be vivid and real. So I always try to think about my messaging. So it's the we've helped versus we will help versus we are helping. So there was, you might have seen the study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology last year, which is looking at time perspectives and persuasion, showed that we are helping yielded about 40% higher average donation than we've helped. So in this way, you're immersing donors, you're experiencing it together, and once again, as Zosha said, they're the hero of the story. You're making giving easy, and this is a really good practice when it comes to sort of supporting those long-term relationships. It needs to be a good experience for the donor, so acknowledgement and stewardship absolutely key. I've seen before about the 3 R's: receiving, recognizing, and reporting. How your donors like this to happen. If you know that, you can keep engaging them as things change and making sure they're part of it, so they can be part of that ongoing story.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I was also thinking about acknowledgement and recognition, and we mentioned it before as well, what donors might expect and how they'd like to be acknowledged. But obviously, in some cases, there will be huge expectations in terms of acknowledgement, or it can be realized with certain gifts. And I just wanted to ask about your experience with managing these expectations and how you've navigated potentially saying no to donors who had maybe unrealistic expectations of what could be achieved. Bex, could I come to you first? Thank you.
Certainly, I think that honesty is absolutely vital between fundraisers and donors. Trust is the absolute cornerstone of your relationship, and as we've mentioned a couple of times now, people give to people. If you have to say no to something and you have a good reason, whatever it is, you need to talk with your donor about it and be clear and honest. I've had to say no to donors a few times. It's helpful to have your wider team back you up. So in one example, I had a donor who wanted our charity to take on a property for a purpose that was quite beyond our remit, and was certainly not within our organizational strategy. So it would have cost us well beyond the value of the gift to make their vision work. It just wasn't possible for us at the time. So with the support of my head of finance at the time, we explained the position this would put us in. The three of us had a really robust conversation. And in that process, we learned a lot more about the donor and their motivations and what their worries were. And that was the exact opposite of what they wanted for us. They thought that by giving us this gift, it would increase our resilience, when actually it actually put us at more risk. So the donor learned more about us as a charity, where we were struggling, and the value of that unrestricted giving. So donors, they want to be heard and respected. Openness and honesty is essential to those long-term relationships. If we had accepted that original gift, we would not have been able to deliver on those promises to our donor. The relationship would have failed, the donor having had a terrible experience, and everybody would be worse off, especially our beneficiaries. So being honest about what we could and couldn't do, and actually about what we as a charity wanted to achieve, meant we could match that again with the donor, reset that relationship, and enable what they did want to achieve to happen, making that relationship ultimately stronger. So the donor, that particular donor, went on to make several more donations and pledged a significant legacy. So saying no won't destroy your relationship with your donor. If you do it right, it might even enhance it. So not to be afraid of having those really honest discussions with your supporters.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Also showing how the rest of the team at the organization can come in and help, kind of even make a stronger case, if anything, for the other gifts. Zosha, have you been in that situation before? How do you manage expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say personally, I've not been in one as sort of extreme as Bex's, which sounds like it was handled beautifully and had a really great and positive outcome. So that's really wonderful to hear. But major donors, like everyone, they're people and they have things that they're interested in and things that they want to do, and a lot of them are not afraid to ask for those. So I am always very conscious not to sort of outright say no to anybody, and I will always go and kind of do my research as to whether something is or isn't possible. And if it isn't, as Bex has flagged, try and be as open and as honest as possible, and come back with a very clearly outlined reason for why it isn't possible and why it isn't either to the best benefit of the organization, or if you're looking at something like the Old Vic, why it just simply isn't possible within the remit of what we're doing. And always offer an alternative as far as possible. I mean, it's very if somebody wants access to come on stage, for example, then we can quite easily turn around and say, well, if you have a look at our membership scheme, you can join here and you can come on stage with X, Y, and Z, and you can come to this event and so forth. So there's definitely always room to sort of turn it around as far as possible. But equally, to be completely honest, there will be some situations where somebody wants something that you simply cannot deliver and they won't be happy about it. So sometimes, unfortunately, it's just being as honest and polite as you possibly can be, and accepting that they're going to be annoyed about it. And just doing all you can as a fundraiser to give them an alternative and make sure that you have explained as clearly and as accurately as you possibly can. But you can only ever do your best in those situations, and you can't account for people's individual personalities all the time.
No, absolutely. I wanted to go back to something Bex mentioned earlier, again, about that long-term relationship with donors and kind of the return on investment. And obviously with the challenging fundraising landscape, the pressure on fundraisers within organizations is quite high. Targets can be quite high as well. So how do you measure the success of your major donor fundraising over that long term? And how do you represent it, say, to the board and to senior management? Yeah, I don't know, Bex, do you want to go first?
Certainly. So yeah, so it's a really good question, especially when you're tracking relationships over multiple years, to be able to demonstrate that return on investment. There are lots of different ways of doing it, both quantitative and qualitative. Obviously, we will have income targets on an annual basis. So I think for me, in terms of for me, success is personally qualitative in terms of that donor had such a great experience with you that they would want to donate again when they're next able to. The largest gift is statistically a donor's seventh, not always in practice, but in terms of stats. So it takes patience and relationship building over months and years to achieve this. And that's the sort of message I tend to give to my board when we're discussing this sort of fundraising. We'll know we've done it right when the donors thanked me, making them feel special, that their gift, whilst in one example, whilst it was relatively small against our fundraising target for a project, we'd framed it in such a way that this person felt that their gift had got the project over the line and that they'd made the project happen. So when discussing it with board, rather than just doing it in stats and figures and numbers, I like to put in little case studies, little quotes, sort of little personal feedback from those donors about how the experience has made them feel and how that has made them committed to our cause and to our organisation longer term. So there are lots of different ways of doing it, but I think particularly for sharing information with boards who get a lot of stats and numbers and lots of the stuff that can be quite challenging in terms of charity governance, it's really nice to bring the stories about how things have made people feel, the great work that we are doing as charities and how that makes both those beneficiaries feel supported in what they're doing, but also in terms of our donors and supporters too.
Thank you. Zosha.
I also love a good bit of feedback or a nice quote in a report. I think it really does bring it to life in the same way. You know, the approach to reporting back on how fundraising being done can take a lot from how we report on our actual projects to our donors. It's not just, you know, here's the budget and here's what we spent against it or here's what we raised against it. It is also here is how we've made a difference and here's what's going on behind the scenes. There's always showing that evidence of industry of what you're doing. You know, you have a long list of people who you're currently in conversation with or who you're planning to get in touch with in the near future. As well as those, you know, those big gifts that have come in or those new donors that have joined, it's very important to make sure that you're accurately reflecting the donors that you already have who are moving up or have given to another project, who have, you know, gone up the giving ladder within your organisation or have renewed for another year or a third year, and to make sure that you're kind of keeping track of that and reporting on it. And yeah, there is nothing lovelier than the day after an event or a meeting when a donor or a prospect sends you an email saying that they had a really good time. And my personal favourite that has happened quite recently, which is a testament to the team who work with them, is one of our supporters said that they felt lucky to support our organisation because they were so well treated. And that is, you know, that's the best message that you can receive from your supporters, because you know that you're doing a job right. And they feel, as they should, special and well loved by the organisation. So yes, definitely get some email quotes in any reporting that you do. It's important to give the story as well as the numbers.
Yeah, that's a great tip and a lovely note to end on, because I think we're nearing the end of our time. So I think as a final question, I just wanted to ask you if you have like any key advice for successful major donor fundraising that you'd like to share with our viewers. Zosha.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we've touched on, Bex and I, throughout this whole conversation, which is that it's all about people. You need to get to know the people that you're asking for money, what motivates them, what interests them enough to part with a substantial gift. And you can do that through utilising all the tools at your disposal, whether that's research, peer-to-peer insight, or good old-fashioned conversation. And as a final point, don't be afraid to ask them for money, because once you get to that point, hopefully they know what they're there for.
Absolutely. And Bex?
Absolutely. I think Zosha's put it brilliantly. Build that rapport, find out motivations, be prepared every time you meet your donor with a range of options. Always start with them and not you. Make them the hero of the story you're building together. Keep things simple. Understand and be able to clearly talk about the need of your organisation and beneficiaries. And like we've discussed, don't be afraid of the word no. Be comfortable with it, and make sure everything is relatable to your donor. You thank them, make them the hero of the story. And as Zosha put so eloquently, don't be afraid to make the ask. If you've done your job right, then asking should be the easiest bit.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So I think we're ready to wind up our conversation today, and I'd like to thank our brilliant panelists, Zosha and Bex. And just to say that here at Achates, we offer a range of services, including recruitment, fundraising, strategy, and organizational development. So if you'd like to discuss how we might be able to support you, or if you'd like to speak to a member of our team, then please do just drop us a line at info@achates.org.uk. Finally, I hope to see you here for our next Achates Live in April, and there'll be more details to follow on that soon, so do keep an eye on your inbox. Thank you so much for joining us, and we very much look forward